The lightsabers clashed against Mustafar's volcanic backdrop, each strike sending sparks into sulphurous air. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, master and apprentice, brothers forged in Clone Wars fire, now stood as mortal enemies on a collection platform suspended above molten rock. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with ash and betrayal. Anakin's eyes burned yellow with the dark side, every moment fueled by rage and desperation. He had lost everything: Padme's trust, his Jedi identity, his very soul. Now he fought with fury born of having nothing left but promised power. Obi-Wan parried each attack with Form 3's defensive mastery, tears streaming down his ash-covered face, his heart breaking with every deflection. "I have failed you, Anakin. I failed you." The duel raged across the facility, each man knowing the other's style so intimately that the fight became almost a dance of predicted movements and desperate improvisations. But Anakin's newfound power carried a fatal flaw: arrogance. When Obi-Wan leaped to the high ground of the volcanic bank, Anakin saw only another obstacle, not the tactical disadvantage it represented. "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." Anakin's response was a snarl of defiance and a reckless leap. Obi-Wan's blade moved with practiced precision, a single devastating strike that severed Anakin's legs and left arm. The Chosen One fell to black sand, his body rolling dangerously close to the lava's edge. His screams echoed across the hellish landscape as his clothes ignited from proximity to molten rock. But this time, something was different. Obi-Wan, overwhelmed by what he had done, did not walk away. He stood frozen, watching through the Force as Anakin's life signature flickered and dimmed. The flames consumed his former brother, and Obi-Wan felt the moment Anakin Skywalker truly died, not just his body, but the last spark of the man he had been. When Darth Sidious arrived minutes later, searching frantically through smoke and ash, he found only a charred corpse beyond any salvation. Emperor Palpatine stood over the smoking remains, his yellow eyes narrowing as the full magnitude of his loss crystallized. For decades, he had orchestrated every move, manipulated every player, building toward this moment. The Empire's rise with Darth Vader as the ultimate enforcer. Now, that carefully constructed future lay as dead as the body at his feet. Mas Amedda found his master standing motionless in the volcanic wasteland, an expression on Palpatine's face the Shagrian advisor had never witnessed, something almost like uncertainty. The Emperor had always possessed contingencies, backup plans layered upon backup plans, but Anakin Skywalker had been irreplaceable. Not because of his power alone, though considerable, but because of what he represented, the perfect fusion of political tragedy and dark side potential. "What are your orders, my lord?" Palpatine's vulnerability vanished, replaced by calculating coldness. "Prepare a holonet statement. Anakin Skywalker perished resisting arrest for crimes against the Republic. He died a traitor." The narrative was already forming, turning Anakin's death into another weapon. But privately, as Palpatine returned to Coruscant aboard his shuttle, he knew the truth. The rule of two had served the Sith for millennium, each apprentice eventually surpassing their master, ensuring the dark side never grew stronger. But Anakin was to have been different. Powerful enough to help Palpatine rule for centuries, young enough to be molded completely, broken enough to never challenge him. Now the Sith plan would need adaptation. The Empire would still rise, still crush the galaxy beneath its heel, but it would be colder, more bureaucratic, more dependent on fear of the state rather than fear of a dark enforcer. Palpatine began formulating new strategies, but in the back of his ancient mind, doubt crept in. Perhaps some destinies, once disrupted, could never be fully restored. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this content so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. We thank you all for your continued support. On Polis Masa's medical facility, Padme Amidala held on to life with determination that had driven her through a career beginning at 14. Obi-Wan had brought her here directly after leaving Mustafar, her unconscious form a reminder of how completely Anakin's fall had destroyed everything. The medical droids had successfully delivered the twins, Luke and Leia, and for 3 precious days, she held them, loved them, whispered promises she would protect them from the darkness their father had become. Obi-Wan sat at her bedside during those final days, his own grief a constant champion. He had brought her here immediately after leaving Mustafar, hoping news of the children might restore Padme's will to live. But the trauma of the Force choke, stress of witnessing Anakin's fall, and complications with emergency delivery had done damage even advanced technology could not reverse. "Promise me they'll never know what he became. Let them remember the man he was." He promised, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. That night, Padme Amidala died quietly, not from a broken heart as poets might say, but from cold medical reality. Sometimes the body cannot recover from trauma, no matter how strong the spirit. The irony was not lost on Obi-Wan. He had failed to save Anakin, and now Anakin's death had failed to save Padme. Yoda arrived to find Obi-Wan holding the infant twins, his face gaunt with grief. The ancient Jedi Master studied his former colleague through eyes that had witnessed 8 centuries of galactic history, understanding something fundamental had shifted in the Force. Separate the children we must. To Tatooine the boy. The girl with Senator Organa on Alderaan. Protected both will be. Obi-Wan nodded numbly, understanding the necessity, even as his heart rebelled against dividing the last piece of Anakin and Padme that remained. He took Luke to the desert world where his father had once dreamed of adventure, while Bail Organa carried Leia to a world of culture and politics, never knowing the destiny awaiting her. While Obi-Wan dueled Anakin on Mustafar's volcanic shores, the Senate chamber on Coruscant echoed with its own battle, lightsabers clashing as 2 Force Masters engaged in combat, representing 1,000 years of Sith planning and Jedi vigilance. Yoda spun and leaped with impossible agility for one so ancient, while Palpatine hurled Senate pods with casual waves of gnarled hands, cackling with dark delight. But something was different this time. Yoda, attuned to the living Force as few Jedi had ever been, sensed a hollow space in his opponent's power, a void where Darth Vader should have been anchoring Sidious's strength through their dark side bond. The Emperor remained formidable, perhaps the most powerful individual in the galaxy, but he was alone in ways the Sith had not been for millennia. Their battle reached its crescendo as Yoda caught a massive Senate pod with the Force, redirecting it toward the Emperor. The shockwave of their powers colliding sent both combatants flying in opposite directions. Palpatine, cackling even in defeat, fled into the Senate building's depths. Fought enough, I have. Time, not strength, will defeat the Sith. It was a gamble based on a long-term view stretching beyond immediate crisis. Yoda understood what Obi-Wan did not yet comprehend, that Palpatine had built his empire on the promise of Vader, and without that enforcer, without that symbol of fallen heroism turned to darkness, the Emperor would need other means to maintain control. The Grand Inquisitor and his hunters would not suffice. The Empire would rely on doctrine and bureaucracy rather than fear, and such foundations were inherently unstable. As Yoda departed for Dagobah, he meditated on the prophecy that had guided the Jedi. Perhaps balance was not about redemption at all. Perhaps Anakin Skywalker's death was the sacrifice required, the wound in the Force that would eventually allow healing to begin, even if that healing would take decades and come at a terrible cost. In the Empire's early years, Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin rose to prominence faster than any other timeline. Without Darth Vader as the Emperor's primary enforcer, Palpatine turned to doctrine, military discipline, and systematic application of overwhelming force to maintain control. The Tarkin Doctrine, ruling through fear of the Empire's technological might, became official policy almost immediately. But doctrine alone could not hunt surviving Jedi. For that, Palpatine accelerated the Inquisitorius program, transforming it from a specialized unit into a galaxy-spanning organization. The Grand Inquisitor, a former Jedi Temple guard whose fall had been carefully cultivated, found himself commanding dozens of lesser Inquisitors, each hunting their former comrades with zealous determination. Yet something fundamental was different. In another timeline, Vader's very presence had been enough to break spirits of those opposing the Empire. His name, whispered in terror, represented the ultimate consequence of rebellion, a fallen hero transformed into something beyond human, beyond mercy. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. Without Vader, the Empire's cruelty became more overt, but somehow less effective. Fear of death was powerful, but could not match the existential dread Vader inspired. Jedi survivors lasted longer. Master Kakruk continued leading clone deserters in guerrilla warfare for nearly a decade. Ahsoka Tano, learning of Anakin's death through the Force, established a more organized resistance network years earlier. Even lesser-known Jedi like Kyrak Infila survived longer, becoming rallying points for early rebellious sentiment. On Coruscant, in the Emperor's throne room, Palpatine studied holographic reports of increasing insurgent activity across the Outer Rim. He had crushed the Jedi Order, dominated the Senate, established an empire spanning the known galaxy, but without Vader, maintaining that grip required constant vigilance, constant force applications, constant power demonstrations. The Empire was broader, reaching further and striking harder, but its foundation was brittle in ways only Palpatine fully understood. Twin Sons of Tatooine beat down mercilessly on the moisture farm where Obi-Wan Kenobi maintained his lonely vigil. He had taken the name Ben, become a hermit, watched from a distance as Owen and Beru Lars raised young Luke Skywalker. But unlike another timeline where guilt over leaving Anakin alive might have kept him passive, this Obi-Wan was hunted by a different burden. He had killed his brother, struck him down, and watched him die. The nightmares were relentless. In dreams, he heard Anakin's screams, felt the moment his lightsaber severed flesh and bone, watched those yellow eyes dim as death claimed the chosen one. Sometimes he wondered if he should have let Anakin live, let Palpatine transform him into whatever monster he would have become. At least then there might have been chance for redemption. This guilt drove him to train Luke earlier. The boy was 7 when Obi-Wan first approached Owen Lars with the proposal. The conversation was heated, with Owen correctly pointing out that training Luke would paint a target on the family. But Obi-Wan's desperation won out, and compromise was reached. Subtle training, nothing obvious. Preparation without declaration. "Ben, why do people say my father was a navigator on a spice freighter?" Sometimes the truth is complicated, Luke. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them believe a simpler story. But Luke, already demonstrating his father's dangerous intuition, sensed the evasion. He grew up knowing something shadowed his origin, some truth the adults conspired to conceal. That knowledge, that sense of hidden destiny, would shape him in ways Obi-Wan could not fully anticipate. The old Jedi watched his young charge and wondered if he was repeating the same mistakes, if his guilt was clouding judgment just as attachment once had. On Tatooine, under twin suns that never seemed to set, Obi-Wan Kenobi prepared a boy for coming war, haunted by the death he had caused and terrified of consequences he might be creating. On Alderaan, in gleaming halls of the royal palace, Leia Organa grew up surrounded by art, culture, and constant hum of political maneuvering. Bail Organa and his wife Breha raised her as their own, never revealing her parentage's truth. But they could not hide the galaxy's harsh realities. Without Vader's focused terror to maintain order, the Empire's cruelty became more widespread and systematic. Leia was 10 when she first attended an Imperial Senate session, sitting beside her father as he navigated the increasingly powerless body. She watched senators capitulate to Imperial demands, spirits broken by years of oppression. But she also noticed something else. Subtle signals, careful word choices, the underground resistance network operating beneath the Empire's notice. The Empire rules through visible force because it lacks invisible fear. That creates opportunities for those willing to watch carefully. By age 15, Leia was already active in her father's covert operations, using her princess status to move through Imperial circles while funneling intelligence to nascent rebel cells. She possessed her mother's political brilliance and her father's force sensitivity, though the latter remained untrained and largely unconscious. She felt things, danger, deception, crucial decision moments, but attributed these instincts to sharp observation rather than mystic power. The Empire, lacking Vader's ability to sense force-sensitive threats, missed her potential entirely. To them, she was just another spoiled princess playing at politics, a useful tool for keeping Alderaan compliant. They never suspected Princess Leia Organa was becoming one of the most effective covert operatives in the growing resistance movement. But this early activation came with cost. Leia grew up harder, less able to trust, carrying rebellion's weight before she was ready. She missed the innocence childhood should have provided, teenage years consumed by coded messages, secret meetings, and constant fear of discovery. When Mon Mothma began formally organizing the Alliance to restore the Republic, Leia was already a veteran of Shadow Wars, barely 18, but carrying wariness of someone twice her age. Deep in the unknown regions, on a world whose name existed in no Imperial records, Emperor Palpatine pursued a solution to his Vader problem. The facility was staffed by the Empire's most brilliant and morally flexible scientists, biologists, geneticists, Sith alchemists, and experts in technologies civilized worlds had banned for good reason. The Emperor had always possessed contingency plans for his own mortality. Order 151, the secret directive establishing cloning facilities and transfer protocols, had been in place long before Anakin's death. But without Vader as his enforcer, Palpatine accelerated these programs decades ahead of schedule. The results were imperfect. Project Necromancy, as it would eventually be classified in scattered Imperial records, sought to create force-sensitive beings that could be controlled absolutely. Scientists experimented with cloning, genetic manipulation, dark side infusion, and techniques borrowed from ancient Sith texts that should have remained buried. The problem, my lord, is fundamental. Lord Vader was not manufactured. He was transformed. We cannot replicate the soul. Palpatine killed the scientist for his honesty, but the words haunted him. Vader had been irreplaceable not because of raw power, though considerable, but because of what he represented. Transformation, fall, redemption denied. A hero corrupted was worth a dozen created monsters. They created abominations, beings of immense power but flawed consciousness, bodies rejecting their own cells, minds collapsing under implanted knowledge weight. Some experiments would eventually evolve into crude precursors of what might have become something like the being known in whispers as Snoke in another reality. But here, decades early and without refined technologies time might have provided, they were failures. Powerful, yes, but unstable, ultimately unsuitable for the role Vader would have filled. The experiments continued anyway because the Emperor could not accept his situation's limitations, but each failure weakened him slightly, draining resources and attention that should have been focused on consolidating his empire. The dark side rippled with his frustration, and across the galaxy, force-sensitive beings felt the disturbance. 20 years after the Republic's fall, the galaxy stood at a precipice it should not have reached so soon. The Rebel Alliance, formed from dozens of disparate resistance cells that had survived longer without Vader hunting them, was larger but more fractured. Without unifying fear of a single dark enforcer, Rebel factions pursued their own agendas, sometimes working at cross purposes. On Tatooine, Obi-Wan Kenobi made a decision that would reshape everything. Luke Skywalker was 19, more trained than he would have been, more aware of his potential, but also more burdened by secrets he knew surrounded his origins. When Imperial forces arrived searching for droids carrying stolen Death Star plans that revealed the Empire's ultimate weapon nearing completion, Obi-Wan saw the moment he had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. Luke, it's time you learned. Your father was Anakin Skywalker, the greatest Jedi Knight, until he fell to the dark side. I fought him. I killed him. The revelation shattered Luke's world, but also crystallized his purpose. Unlike another version who might have learned this truth gradually, this Luke had to integrate reality of his father's fall and death simultaneously. It hardened something in him, forged determination that was less about redemption and more about ensuring his father's mistakes were not repeated. On Alderaan, Leia received word that stolen plans had been delivered to the rebellion, but at terrible cost. Bail Organa had been arrested by Imperial forces, his cover finally blown after 2 decades of covert resistance. The Empire, lacking Vader's subtle approach, opted for maximum visibility. Alderaan itself would be made an example through systematic, brutal subjugation rather than the Death Star's single devastating blast. Yoda, meditating in Dagobah's swamps, felt the Force tremble with approaching catastrophe. He had bet on time defeating the Emperor, on Palpatine's weakness without Vader, causing the Empire to crumble from within. But he had underestimated how much brutality an Emperor could inflict when operating without restraint even Vader's presence had imposed. We have to attack now. Waiting only makes the Empire stronger. Obi-Wan wanted to agree, wanted to counsel patience, but couldn't. Without Anakin's redemption, there was no prophecy to fulfill, no destiny to lean on. There was only war. In the deepest currents of the Force, where life and death become indistinguishable and time flows like water, Anakin Skywalker existed as something incomplete. Not a Force ghost in the traditional sense. He had died too conflicted, too consumed by darkness for that peaceful transformation. But not damned either, not lost to the dark side forever. He was something in between, a presence without form, aware but unable to act. He watched as his son prepared for war, as his daughter led rebel operations, as the galaxy he had helped destroy now teetered on the edge of either salvation or total collapse. He saw Obi-Wan's guilt, Palpatine's frustration, Yoda's desperate gambit playing out across decades. Years later, when the Empire finally fell, not in a single climactic battle, but through grinding campaign costing millions of lives, Luke Skywalker stood victorious, but irrevocably changed. He defeated Palpatine not through compassion turning an enemy, but through hard-won wisdom that some darkness can only be destroyed, not redeemed. It was a crueler lesson than he deserved to learn, but it was true. Leia, serving as one of the New Republic's founding senators, rebuilt a government with safeguards against corruption that had destroyed the Old Republic. She did this without knowing her Force sensitivity, without Jedi training, proving heroism did not require mystical power, only conviction and courage. Obi-Wan Kenobi died in battle, covering the rebel evacuation from Alderaan, finally finding peace in sacrifice after 2 decades of guilt. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry. His last sight was of Luke Skywalker, standing tall and determined, carrying on the fight in a way neither he nor Anakin had managed. Yoda passed into the Force on Dagobah, whispering that the prophecy had been misunderstood from the beginning. Balance was not about the Chosen One, it was about the galaxy learning to survive without one. In the Force, Anakin Skywalker felt these events ripple through existence. He was neither light nor dark, neither redeemed nor damned. He was something more fundamental, a wound that had scarred over, a sacrifice that had meaning even without Absolution's comfort. The galaxy survived without Darth Vader, but it bore survival's scars. Balance came through blood and loss, through sacrifice that earned no reward. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of what might have been, remember to hit that subscribe button and join us for more explorations of the infinite possibilities within that galaxy far, far away. May the Force be with you, always.